She thought it was just a noisy BBQ. Until one call changed everything. The smell of grilled meat drifted lazily through the warm afternoon air, curling above the neatly trimmed lawns like a promise of laughter, togetherness, and new beginnings. Sunlight glinted off freshly washed cars and white picket fences, bathing the suburban street in a glow that felt almost cinematic. To anyone passing by, this looked like the perfect summer day the kind people imagined when they dreamed of safe neighborhoods and friendly neighbors. But beneath that peaceful surface, tension was already quietly gathering, waiting for a spark. For the family hosting the barbecue, this wasn't just a casual cookout. It was a declaration of hope. The father stood near the grill, tall and composed, methodically turning skewers with practiced calm. His movements were confident but unassuming, the kind of quiet presence that didn't demand attention yet somehow commanded it. He wore a simple short-sleeved shirt, already darkening slightly with sweat, and his posture spoke of discipline earned over years of responsibility. Nearby, his wife arranged bowls of food on a folding table, greeting guests with a warmth that felt genuine, not forced. Their children darted across the lawn, laughter ringing out as they chased one another with the careless joy only kids seem capable of. This barbecue was meant to be an introduction. After months of planning, saving, and sacrifice, the family had finally moved into the neighborhood they believed would offer stability, safety, and opportunity. For them, this house wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of how far they'd come. The father had worked long hours, endured setbacks, and carried burdens few people ever saw. His wife had stood beside him through every late night and difficult decision, believing in a future that often felt just out of reach. This neighborhood represented that future finally arriving. They wanted to start things the right way, so they invited the neighbors. Some came out of curiosity. Others arrived out of politeness. A few showed up with cautious smiles, bringing store-bought side dishes and rehearsed small talk. Conversations floated through the yard, compliments about the weather, remarks about the house, vague comments about how nice it was to see new faces around here. On the surface, everything felt cordial. But if you listened closely, there was an edge beneath the politeness. An unspoken evaluation happening in real time. Across the street, behind lace curtains that barely moved, someone was watching. She had lived on this block longer than almost anyone else. Decades of memories were rooted in that house: holidays, routines, expectations of how things were supposed to be. From her vantage point at the front window, she observed the gathering with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. The laughter, the music, the number of cars parked along the curb, it all felt excessive to her, disruptive, out of place. Her gaze lingered on the man at the grill. She didn't know his story. She didn't know his sacrifices. She didn't know the responsibility he carried every day. All she saw was someone she had already decided didn't belong. Her fingers tightened around the curtain as the music grew a little louder, and another burst of laughter floated across the street. In her mind, this wasn't a friendly neighborhood barbecue. It was a disturbance, a challenge, a sign that things were changing in ways she didn't approve of. And she hated that feeling, back in the yard. The father laughed softly as one of his children tugged at his arm, asking when the food would be ready. He smiled down at them, pride flickering briefly across his face. Moments like this mattered to him. Moments of normalcy, family, of peace. What he didn't notice was the way some neighbors whispered when they thought he wasn't listening, or the subtle way a few glances lingered a little too long, measuring him, questioning him. He was used to scrutiny. He'd lived with it most of his adult life, but today, he chose not to acknowledge it. Today was about joy, about community, about belonging. The music dipped as his wife clinked a spoon against a glass, calling everyone's attention. She thanked them for coming, her voice steady and sincere. She spoke about being grateful, about how much it meant to feel welcomed, about hoping their children would grow up surrounded by kindness. There were polite nods, a few smiles, scattered applause across the street. The woman scoffed quietly. She told herself she was just being practical, that someone had to maintain standards, that neighborhoods like this didn't stay nice by accident. Her mind raced with justifications as she watched. People she barely recognized, Standing on lawns, she felt somehow belonged to her. The sound of a child laughing loudly made her flinch. "That's enough," she muttered under her breath. She reached for her phone back at the barbecue. The father finally sensed a shift in the atmosphere, not in his yard, but beyond it. The laughter seemed to falter, conversations trailing off as guests noticed something none of them had expected. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of sirens. At first, no one reacted. Sirens were common in cities, after all. Easy to ignore, but the sound grew louder, closer. A tight knot formed in the father's chest instinctively. Years of experience had trained him to recognize that sound not just as noise, but as meaning. His eyes lifted, scanning the street. His expression calm, but suddenly alert. His wife noticed the change in him immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly, before he could answer. The flashing lights appeared at the end of the block, red and blue, reflecting off parked cars and quiet homes like an accusation. Conversations stopped. Music cut out abruptly. Children slowed, confused by the sudden shift in energy. 2 police vehicles pulled up along the curb. Silence fell over the gathering. Like a heavy blanket, guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Another muttered, "Is everything okay?" No one had an answer. All eyes turned toward the family hosting the event. Curiosity and suspicion mixing in equal measure. The father stepped forward slightly, his posture straight, his face unreadable. He didn't look surprised, but he didn't look afraid either. He placed a calming hand on his wife's back as the officers opened their car doors. Across the street, behind her window, the woman watched with a thin, satisfied smile. She believed she had done the right thing. She believed this was the moment order would be restored. She had no idea she had just set into motion something that would change the entire neighborhood and expose truths she was not prepared to face as the officers began walking toward the yard. The father took a slow breath, steadying himself. He glanced at his children, then back at the approaching uniforms. A flicker of something deeper passing through his eyes. Not fear, resolve. They judged him in front of everyone. Not knowing who he really was, the sound of footsteps on grass seemed louder than it should have been. Each step the officers took toward the backyard felt like a countdown. The kind that made hearts beat faster and conversations die mid-sentence. Neighbors who had been laughing just moments ago now stood frozen, unsure where to look at the uniforms approaching, or at the family who had invited them with such warmth only. Minutes earlier, the children sensed it first. The younger one stopped running. Clutching the hem of his mother's shirt, his eyes wide and confused. The older child straightened, her playful smile fading as she took in the flashing lights and stiff body language around her. Neither of them understood what was happening, only that something felt wrong. The father noticed everything. He noticed the way one officer's hand hovered near his belt knot aggressively, but cautiously. He noticed the subtle shift in how some neighbors stepped back, as if distance alone could protect them from association. He noticed how quickly curiosity replaced kindness in certain faces. Years of experience had trained him to read rooms like this. The officers stopped a few feet away. One of them, younger, glanced at a small notepad and looked up at the father with a professional but guarded expression. "We received a noise complaint," the officer said, his voice firm but controlled, "and a report of a disturbance." A murmur rippled through the guests. "A disturbance?" someone whispered. The father blinked once, slowly. "A disturbance?" he repeated calmly. "Officer, this is a family barbecue. We have music playing at a reasonable volume, and everyone here was invited." The officer nodded, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the crowd, as if weighing unspoken assumptions. "We'll need to check things out," before the father could respond. A sharp voice cut through the tension. "It's been loud for hours." The woman from across the street said as she stepped forward, her posture rigid, her chin lifted. Her presence shifted the energy immediately. "This is a quiet neighborhood. We don't do events like this." Her eyes locked onto the father, and for a split second, something cold passed between them. He recognized it, judgment. He met her gaze evenly. "Ma'am, it's mid-afternoon. We checked the local noise guidelines before hosting. We're well within them," she scoffed, folding her arms. "That's not the point. There are children, elderly residents, people who expect peace. This isn't a park." His wife inhaled sharply, but stayed silent, gripping the edge of the table as if anchoring herself. One of the guests cleared his throat awkwardly. Another shifted, clearly uncomfortable. No one spoke up. The woman turned back to the officers. "I told the dispatcher there were too many people, cars blocking the street, loud music. I was concerned things might get out of hand." Implication hung in the air. The younger officer glanced at the older one, who nodded slightly before addressing the father again. "Sir, can I see some identification?" A hush fell. The request wasn't unusual. It was standard procedure. But the way it landed publicly, in front of his family, his children, his neighbors, made it feel heavier than it should have been. The father reached into his pocket calmly and handed over his ID. The woman watched closely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, as if waiting for validation. The officer studied the card briefly, then paused. His eyes flicked up to the father's face, then back down again. Something subtle shifted in his expression, not recognition, but curiosity. He handed the ID back without comment. "Everything checks out," he said carefully. But the woman wasn't satisfied. "I don't feel safe," she said sharply. "There are too many people, and honestly, I don't recognize half of them." The father's jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "They're our friends and family," he replied. "We invited them." She shook her head. "This neighborhood has standards." That was when the emotional weight finally pressed down on the children. "Mom," the younger one whispered, his voice trembling. "Are we in trouble?" His wife knelt immediately, pulling him close, her smile strained but reassuring. "No, sweetheart. Everything's okay." But it didn't feel okay. The father felt something stirred deep in his chest, not rage, but a familiar ache. He had stood in rooms like this before, had watched people make decisions about him without knowing a single chapter of his life. He had promised himself long ago that his children wouldn't have to carry that same burden, and yet, here it was. One neighbor finally spoke up half-heartedly. "It does seem a bit loud." Another nodded, emboldened. "Yeah, maybe tone it down." The woman seized the moment, her confidence growing. "Exactly. This kind of thing should be cleared first. We have rules." The father straightened fully now, his voice steady but firm. "With respect, ma'am, we followed every rule. We informed immediate neighbors. We're within legal limits. We're simply enjoying time with our family." The officer shifted uncomfortably. He could feel the imbalance, how this was less about noise and more about perception, about who was deemed acceptable. "I'm going to ask you to lower the music," the officer said, clearly hoping to de-escalate, "just to keep the peace." Father nodded slowly. "Of course." As his wife turned the volume down, something inside him settled, not submission, but patience. He knew when to wait, when to let moments unfold naturally. The woman watched, her shoulders relaxing slightly, as if she had one. But as the officers prepared to leave, the older one paused. "Sir," he said quietly to the father, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "If you don't mind me asking, what do you do for work?" The question caught the woman's attention immediately. The father looked at the officer, then briefly at his wife, his children, the crowd watching him as if his answer would define his worth. He gave a small, polite smile. "I serve the community," he said simply. The officer nodded, thoughtful. Behind them, the woman frowned, unsettled by the calm confidence she couldn't quite explain. The police cars didn't leave right away. The officers lingered, exchanging quiet words. Glancing back at the father more than once, whispers spread through the crowd again, this time not judgment, but confusion, and across the street. The woman felt something unfamiliar twist in her stomach. Doubt, the whole neighborhood turned against him. Then the radio crackled. The officers didn't leave right away. That detail alone changed everything. Their continued presence sent a quiet message rippling through the crowd. This situation wasn't over. Guests who had planned to stay and eat began gathering their things. Plates were set down half-finished. Conversations faded into awkward goodbyes. One by one, people found excuses to leave. Not wanting to be part of whatever this had become, the backyard, once alive with warmth and laughter, began to feel exposed. The father watched it happen in silence. He saw how quickly comfort turned into distance. How easily people retreated when being associated with him suddenly felt risky. He didn't blame them, not entirely. Fear had a way of making people forget their better instincts. But his children noticed. "Why are they leaving?" his daughter asked softly, her voice cracking despite her attempt to sound mature. His wife opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't know how to answer without telling a truth too. It's heavy for a child's heart. The woman from across the street stood near the officers now, her arms crossed like a badge of authority she hadn't earned. She spoke loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "I just think it's irresponsible," she said. "You never know who people really are these days." The father turned to face her fully. "What exactly are you implying?" he asked, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. She lifted her chin. "I'm saying this neighborhood didn't agree to be a venue. There are rules, expectations. We've worked hard to keep things orderly. Calling the police on a family gathering accomplishes that?" He asked. She hesitated for half a second, just long enough to reveal something raw beneath her confidence, then recovered. "If that's what it takes?" One of the remaining neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided eye contact entirely. The older officer finally spoke again. "Ma'am, we've already addressed the noise. Everything here is under control." She frowned. "But you can't just ignore how this looks." The officer met her gaze. "What it looks like isn't always what it is." That wasn't the answer she wanted. She turned sharply toward the father, her voice tightening. "You should have known better than to host something like this without permission." His wife stepped forward then, her composure cracking just slightly. "We don't need permission to gather with our family in our own home." The woman scoffed. "People like you move in and think the rules don't apply." The words landed like a slap. A heavy silence followed. The father felt it then, not anger, but something deeper. A resolve shaped by years of holding himself to standards others never expected of him. He stepped between his wife and the woman, his presence protective but controlled. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Your assumptions say more about you than they do about us." The younger officer shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. He glanced toward his partner, then down at his radio as it crackled softly. "Unit 12, a voice came through, distorted but clear enough to carry authority. "Status update requested." The older officer lifted the radio. "Situation is stable. Neighborhood noise complaint." There was a pause. Then the voice returned, sharper this time. "Copy that, and confirm location again." The officer repeated the street, named another pause. The father watched closely now. Something in the officer's posture changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. His spine straightened. His expression sharpened. "Understood," the voice said. "Stand by." The woman noticed it too. "What is that about?" she asked, irritation creeping into her voice. The officer didn't answer immediately. The radio crackled again, just to clarify. The voice continued. "You're currently at the residence of," the officer cut the transmission abruptly, his hand tightening around the radio. The younger officer looked at him confused. "What is it?" The older officer exhaled slowly. "I need to make a call." Stepped a few feet away. The woman's confidence wavered. "Why would that matter?" she demanded. The father remained silent, his eyes steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply waited. His wife looked at him, searching his face. "Is something wrong?" she whispered. "No," he replied softly. "Something's about to be right." The remaining neighbors watched now with renewed attention. The shift was palpable. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a barbecue anymore. The older officer returned. His expression transformed, not alarmed, but respectful. "Sir," he said to the father, his voice lower now, "may I speak with you privately?" The woman stepped forward instinctively. "What about my complaint?" The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, please give us a moment." "I have a right, please," he repeated, firmer this time, reluctantly. She stepped back. The father nodded once and followed the officer a few steps away. Whispers erupted. "What's going on? Why are they treating him differently now? Did something come back on the ID?" The children clung to their mother. Sensing the gravity of the moment, the officer stopped, squared his shoulders, and looked the father directly in the eye. "Sir," he said quietly, "I apologize for the way this situation has unfolded." The father met his gaze. "Apology accepted." The officer swallowed. "We weren't informed properly." The woman watched from a distance, her certainty dissolving into unease. She didn't know it yet. But the story she thought she was writing was no longer hers to control. The woman who called the cops froze when she heard his name. The air felt different now. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was anticipation. The kind that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. Waiting for a truth they can sense, but don't yet understand. The backyard, once scattered with half-empty chairs and cooling food trays, had become a silent stage. The father stood calmly as the older officer cleared his throat. "Sir," the officer said, his voice no longer procedural, no longer guarded. "I just received confirmation from dispatch." The woman across the yard crossed her arms tighter, trying to reclaim her authority. "Confirmation of what?" she demanded. The officer didn't look at her. He looked at the father. "Confirmation that you are Chief Michael Johnson," he said carefully. "The newly appointed police chief of this district." The words didn't explode. They settled, like thunder rolling slowly across the sky. The realization spread through the yard, neighbor to neighbor, face to face. Eyes widened. Mouths fell slightly open. A few people inhaled sharply as if the air itself had shifted weight. The woman staggered back half a step. That can't be right," she said, her voice suddenly thin. "He didn't say, 'I didn't need to,'" father replied evenly. The younger officer snapped to attention almost instinctively, his posture straightening as if pulled by an invisible string. "Chief," he said, nodding respectfully. The father raised a hand gently. "At ease." The woman's face drained of color. She looked from the officers to the father, then back again, searching for denial, for correction, for something, anything to restore the world she thought she understood. "You're the police chief?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "Yes." The silence was deafening. A neighbor spoke without meaning to. "Oh my God," another murmured. "We didn't know." The father turned slowly, addressing everyone not with anger but with measured clarity. "I didn't move here to be known by my title. I moved here to raise my family. To be a neighbor, to belong." The officer stepped forward again. "Chief, I want to formally apologize for how this situation was handled. The call should have been assessed differently." The father nodded. "Apology accepted. Learn from it." The woman's knees looked unsteady now. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," she said weakly. "From what?" he asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Nothing came out. The father gestured gently to the yard. This was a family barbecue. Nothing more. Nothing less. And yet, assumptions were made. His children watched him now, with confusion but awe. His wife's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but pride. The officer turned to the woman. "Ma'am, there was no violation. No disturbance. Your complaint was based on perception, not fact." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know who he was." Father responded softly but firmly. "That's exactly the point." The words struck deeper than any raised voice ever could. Around them, neighbors shifted in shame. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked directly at the ground, replaying their own silence, their own quick judgments. The woman swallowed hard. I may have overreacted." "Overreacting isn't the issue," the father said. "Dehumanizing is." The officer cleared his throat again. "Chief, would you like us to remain on site?" The father shook his head. "No, you've done enough." He turned to the woman one last time. "I hope next time you choose conversation over accusation. What? She nodded stiffly. Humiliation etched into every line of her face. As the police vehicles pulled away, the street remained frozen. Like a photograph taken at the exact moment power changed hands. The barbecue hadn't been stopped. It had been transformed. Asterisk by sunset. The neighborhood learned a lesson it would never forget. The street didn't return to normal right away, even after the police cars disappeared around the corner. The silence lingered, thick, reflective, uncomfortable. The kind of silence that forces people to sit with what they'd just witnessed. What they'd participated in, what they hadn't stopped. The father broke it first. He picked up the tongs from the grill, checked the food, and calmly flipped a piece of chicken as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The simple act sent a quiet message through the yard. This was still his home. This was still a family gathering. His wife exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. "Food's almost ready," she said gently, her voice steady but emotional. The children relaxed slowly, tension melting from their shoulders as normalcy crept back in. The younger one smiled tentatively. "Can we still eat?" The father crouched down to meet his eyes. "Of course we can." That moment broke something open in the crowd. A neighbor stepped forward. One had left earlier but returned after watching the police drive away. He cleared his throat. I owe you an apology. We should have spoken up." Another followed. "I judged without knowing. I'm sorry." Soon apologies came in. Waves. Not dramatic, not performative, but real. Awkward. Human. The woman across the street stood apart. Her arms no longer crossed. Her posture diminished. She watched as people re-entered the yard, as chairs were unfolded again, as laughter cautiously returned. Eventually, she walked over. Each step looked heavier than the last. "I was wrong," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I thought I was protecting something, but I see now. I was afraid of what I didn't understand." The father studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. "Fear can be taught," he said, "but so can respect." She swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it." He gestured to the table. "You're welcome to eat." Her eyes widened slightly. Kindness, it turned out, was heavier than punishment. As the sun dipped lower, the yard filled again, not with forced politeness, but something warmer. Genuine connection. Conversations deepened. Children played freely. The barbecue became what it was always meant to be. Later that evening, as dusk settled and guests began to leave for good this time, the father stood at the edge of the lawn with his wife. "You didn't have to handle it like that," she said softly. "You could have shut it down." He smiled faintly. Power doesn't prove itself by flexing. It proves itself by restraint. Across the street, the woman watched from her porch, not with resentment this time, but reflection. The neighborhood would talk about that day for years, not because a barbecue got shut down, but because a man they underestimated showed them what leadership really looked like.